Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. And thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to kick off this webinar series and talk about how we are reimagining hiring and how founded as a team, we are working with the recruiter community as a whole to bring the best of what we had to offer and the best of learnings. So we'll just wait for a few minutes for a few more folks to join before we get started with the webinar. And in the meanwhile, please do hang on. We'll wait for a few more folks to join us, and we'll get started. All right, we have 120 odd participants who have already joined us, so we can get started. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and welcome to this session of the RecRoute webinar series from us at Foundit. And just in terms of introduction, we are Foundit, formerly known as Monster in APAC and Middle East, and as the recruiter tool of choice for across industries, across geographies. We are really proud to being able to say that we've had 50,000 plus recruiters who have trusted Foundit for their hiring requirements. So we've had 74 million plus registered profiles on our platform, and just in the last month alone, we had more than 1.3 million job seekers actually applying for roles. Over the last few months, you must have seen a lot from us on our social media and on some of the emails that you would have received from us, where we launched new version of our recruiter product. And essentially what we brought to the market is the ability for recruiters to go beyond the traditional modes of recruiting and really start thinking about how can they look at a wide variety of candidates, not just the ones who are registered with Foundit, not just the ones who are on the platform, but also folks who are off the platform as well. We have expanded the number of filters that we've had. We've brought some deep industry insights into the platform. We have changed the way that you can search for your candidates, and brought in the best-in-class collaboration tools so that as a recruitment team, you're best enabled to bring to life your vision of what it means to build up your teams. We've also newly introduced an AI-enabled automated outreach sequence, and what that means as recruiters, you can actually go out and create campaigns and track those campaigns and make sure that every candidate that you're reaching out to has the best chance of success in responding to you. So I will send out a poll later at this point of time if you would like to see a demo of the new launch that we've had in the last month and a half or so. Happy to show you, happy to have the team show it to you. And just a little bit more about Hiring Reimagined. We've had a series of webinars over the past year and a half, speaking to leading recruiters across India, Middle East, and Asia Pacific. And we've had extremely good response from the community, and we look forward to continue to do so. And so, getting into the topic today, before I get into a little bit of introduction, we have a huge series of webinars that's going on into the middle of March, and this is the first in the session and the first for 2024, and this topic and the topic that we have is an excellent one, where we are going to be talking about what can we really do to boost talent acquisition in 2024. I'm your host, Yogesh, and I lead product marketing at Foundit. And I've been with the organization for about a year and a half or so. And I've seen how the recruitment community has really come together in terms of helping each other and really being able to track the best of what we are able to offer to recruiters as a whole. In terms of housekeeping, a quick couple of words. We are recording this webinar, and you will be receiving a copy of the webinar in your email a couple of days after this webinar is over. You will also have the ability to ask questions using the Q&A box in the chat that's there. We'll be sending out a survey. We'll have a couple of polls that we'll be running through. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we will also be sharing the recording via the email. So today's topic, talking about talent acquisition and strategies for success in 2024. We've all seen that 2023 has been a little bit of a tumultuous year across industries. We've seen a lot of ups and downs, but I'm sure a lot of us would like to know what's coming up in this year, what's new, and what can recruitment leaders and recruiters and the top talent acquisition teams really expect to see. So to that end, I'm very, very pleased to introduce our panel today. The first off, we have Dhilip. Dhilip Kumar Raju is the head of staffing at Asia Pacific at TCS, and he's based out of Singapore. And in his current role, he's responsible for the staffing for the Asia Pacific business at TCS. One interesting tidbit about Dhilip is that he also has a few patents under his name after having won various hackathons for HR, and which is a huge credit. So Dhilip, do say hi to our audience today.
Hello, everyone.
Next, I have Suresh Venkata, who's head of talent acquisition at Genesys. And Suresh is based out of Chennai in India. And with 20 plus years of experience, Suresh has led multiple teams to be really high performing in terms of building the right talent strategies and talent acquisition strategies. The really interesting thing about Suresh is also that he's not just a recruiter. He's worn multiple hats, worked in finance, and I think I'm sure you'll hear some extremely interesting takes from him. The prep calls that I've had with both with Suresh and with Dhilip have been absolutely wonderful, and I'm sure that we will talk about some really interesting topics. So let me just go over to the first question while I'm just going to switch off my screen sharing for now. All right. Suresh, the first question that I had was sort of for you, and I wanted to ask you. Sorry, let me put the question to Dhilip. What are the trends that you're seeing that are shaping up in the future requirement in 2024? We have seen that AI has had a huge impact in pretty much every area of work, from marketing to sales to finance, and now HR as well. So where do you see the push coming in? Where do you see the changes coming in 2024?
Sure. Thanks, Yogesh. Good afternoon, good evening, and good day to everyone who's joined us from various parts of the world. Just before we started, we were told that we had participants from UK, outside of Southeast Asia as well. So good day to all of you. Thank you, Yogesh and Team Foundit, for bringing us together. Also, Suresh, it's my pleasure to share this space with you. I'm eagerly looking forward to a lot of mind share here this evening. Coming to your question, Yogesh, after a rather interesting and a very demanding 2023 for talent and recruitment, characterized by, of course, the uncertain economic climate and talent priorities, have definitely changed for business. The recruitment landscape is also ever evolving. So, if I have to look at what is really shaping the now and the near future and the longer term future for recruitment, I would probably bucket this into three aspects. What does it mean for business? From a business perspective, the expectation is we are an agile recruitment function. How would we define this? Basically, we are talking about having a recruiting led bottom up hiring forecast, because just in time hiring is not going to be very productive. We're also talking about moving from a hiring for a job to a skills first approach. So, how is recruitment as a function wired to support this need from a business perspective? The first one, of course, not giving any leeway to artificial intelligence and machine learning, something that everybody is talking about. Interestingly, I started my career in 2011 with staffing function, and in my HR induction with TCS, we were spoken to about a tool called Best Fit Engine. It's exactly what your artificial intelligence of today is doing, and this isn't new. This is something that we've been talking about over the years. It's just that it's taken a nice form and shape now, so there is no shying away from it. It is going to be the future, be it screening resumes, conducting interviews, or also arriving almost at a near best fitment. Machine learning for a better predictive hiring and analytics around it. I think these are things that we certainly cannot avoid. But what would take precedence, in my view, in the future is that EY states that in their recent survey, 30% of workforce from 2025 would be the Zoomers, who basically value diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if your hiring practices are not focusing on bringing diverse talent and going to be very traditional, that's something that will not go well with the Zoomers. And I think that will call for a very conscious change. That's going to be one of the biggest changes. We're also talking about equipping recruiters through a upskilling program. I'll give you an example. We are talking about a lot of tech advancements in the industry that's going to come up for recruitment as a function. You spoke about whatever foundit is doing with respect to artificial intelligence or machine learning. But if we are not really looking at the upskilling of recruiters for the future, we're going to be lagging behind in this race and war for talent. And when I say recruiter upskilling, we're talking about upskilling them not just in technology, but being able to recruit for the gig workforce and for talent on cloud. A recruiter in my team in Asia Pacific could be based in any country, but is expected to also over and above know about the immigration nuances, the taxation compliances, everything associated with this aspect to be able to source and recruit for talent on cloud, because we are location agnostic. We're talking about working remote in a hybrid workspace. The last one for me that will be very important from a future perspective is I would say this as recruiter intimacy. Yogesh, you've been also talking about recruitment as recruiter as a marketeer, right? I
Yes.
think we really have to look at every transaction as a first date night. What would you really want in your first date? You would want that to be as perfect as possible. You would want definitely a repeat date if things go well. And you, apart from being sincere and genuine, you would be open, you would be transparent. Now, making every conversation with a candidate and winning over the next date is going to be of paramount importance, because I say this always: a single tragedy is probably very, very personal, but a million death becomes a statistic. So you'll have to treat every case as personal as possible. And all the tools that we spoke about for the future is going to sort of enable that. And these, I believe, are some of the trends that would probably shape the near future of recruitment.
Excellent. Some really good takes over there. I think personalization has been something that pretty much every function, whether it be e-commerce, whether it be banking, whether it be marketing, is something that has been picked up for a really long time. But there's always this challenge of, have we cracked it yet? But then with recruiting, it becomes very, very personal as well, right? Because there's a real human being at the other end of that email or that call, because they are depending on you as a recruiter to make sure that they find a place in your organization and are a contributing member to your team. Suresh, what are your thoughts here? I mean, you and I, we have had a few chats about this, but where do you see things going, and any counters to what Dhilip was saying, or do you have other something else that you would like to add? Suresh, think we cannot hear you. Sure.
Sure.
So while we wait for Suresh's audio to come back on, personalization is, of course, sort of the holy grail of most data-driven businesses, especially as we try to figure out, let's get to talking about what that particular individual really cares about. And Dilip, you mentioned this, it's sort of like a first date, right? So why would a marketer or a recruiter or a salesperson want to really think about, I need to impress this person and give that individual value, show that I have something of value to them right from the very first conversation. And something that we typically also see is that, and I think this happens with the more mature marketers as well as recruiters, is that they know where to start in terms of thinking about, am I sending the right messages? Am I sending the right kind of communication as part of what we are saying? So I think that's a very, very fundamental question that we are all trying to answer, and that's part of the evolution of our careers itself, going from spray and pray to something that's a little more targeted, elicit a response.
Exactly. I think hyper-personalization is going to be the key as talent become more and more scarce. We're seeing a huge gap between demand and supply. And if you really don't hyper-personalize the entire process, I think there would be roadblocks. Very, very well said, Yogesh. Yeah. Suresh, can we hear us now?
Oh, unfortunately, your audio is still off. Unfortunately, we can't hear you, Suresh. All right. It's 2024, a few years after Zoom, and we're still getting used to tech issues like this. But that's part of it.
Yeah. I think someone had pinged me on chat with respect to what we were speaking on hyper-personalization a little while ago to ask, would AI be able to work well if the CV was not well written? I think it's a very valuable point. It's about what you feed the AI and how, as recruiters, we train the AI engines for it to be successful. It's extremely important that we have well-read scripts to train the AI as a tool for it to work well. It's extremely important. That's a very valid point someone from the audience had raised.
Yeah, and that's a very, yeah, absolutely. And that's where it's also important for any vendor, including folks like us, to understand what are the limitations of AI while not giving in to some of the biases that we might have. And a case in point that I wonder as a marketer is, and I asked my team this: are we too elitist in terms of how we are reaching out to our customers? Are we too fancy in terms of how we are communicating with people? Let's not forget there's a huge percentage of the population which is still upcoming. The long tail of of the population in Asia Pacific might not be as conversant with putting together a resume, but that does not mean that they don't deserve to be looked in as potential candidates for a role, whichever industry that they're applying from. And I think that's where I believe, it's my belief that it's that vendors and as well as organizations need to be very, very careful in terms of doing as much as possible to remove this bias in terms of diversity, gender, language choices, location, and so on.
Great. Suresh, good to have you back.
Yeah, I think I had my first real life experience of 2024 on Murphy's Law. So, yeah, so maybe Yogesh. Yeah.
Oh, so Dilip was talking about some of the trends that he's seeing, especially as it comes around to AI. We were talking about how machine learning needs to be more useful. We were also talking about hyper personalization as a key element of what recruiters need to start leaning into. And I was wondering, what's your take on 2024 and especially given the shifts that we have seen over the last year or two for the industry as a whole?
Sure. First of all, thanks for the opportunity and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the webinar listeners. My take is going to be slightly different. I know Dhilip has gone very high tech and spoke about AI. My primary focus is that I think is going to kind of not redefine, but kind of come back with strong emphasis are one, candidate experience. Today, I think with great resignation plus post that the layoff cycles that we had, a lot of organizations today are realizing that it's important to invest right in terms of building the right candidate experience processes. It could be about building the right process, or it could be also using the right technology and tools to enhance the candidate experience. In the last 10, 15 years, maybe even when Dilip and I started some 15 years or 2 decades ago, we kind of seen the market shift from an employee-driven to an employer-driven. So earlier, it was primarily employers who were driving the market, setting the context in terms of the hiring, in terms of EVPs and everything. But today, things have changed. It's much more employee-driven. So a lot of organizations are really thinking big and trying to kind of redefine their entire candidate experience processes to make it much more seamless and make them very attractive in terms of the talent pool. Because today, any candidate or any talent which is worth its market in terms of they talk to a lot of organizations parallelly, right? How do you then make your organization stand out? So candidate experience is an area that a lot of organizations are looking at it. I think that will probably be one of the hidden trends that kind of emerge in 2024. And the second, if you kind of look at it, we HR or talent acquisition folks are not the first when it comes to adopting technology, right? So we are much more traditional in terms of the processes that we do. Maybe Dhilip may kind of disagree a little bit there, but I see us kind of getting more adoptive in terms of technology, and automation is an area that will come up really big in terms of recruitment, where a lot of organizations are, as Dhilip rightly pointed out, AI is going to be one of the primary areas which will drive recruitment, be it operation or strategies for not just 2024, but for years of the future. So I think as a talent acquisition and HR professionals, we'll get more data centric now. So what we used to run based on intuition, we will become more data centric today. And a third, again, a very important trend that has emerged from 2022 to 23 is emphasis on employer branding. Today, a lot of organizations have seen how important it is to have a very strong employer branding, be it for internal and external purposes. I think that's an area that you will see a lot of organizations really investing and fine-tuning their strategies. One interesting trend I've seen is earlier employer branding used to be part of the TA or the HR KPI. Today, you get to see organizations creating specific specialist roles which focuses on employer branding. So my key takeaways for 2024 will be driving better candidate experiences, bringing more data-centric recruitment processes, and third is a renewed emphasis in terms of building a better employer branding identity.
Excellent. Talking about data, or you're always going to have this balance between how much data is too much data, and what do you do with all of this data that's there, right? So what sort of analytics do you believe that teams are actually beginning to build in, and especially some of the leaders in HR analytics across industries that you have been speaking to? I'm just curious to see, where do you see the kind of analytics that are built in, and what sort of measures and KPIs are recruiting leaders and teams actually being tracked on? So yes, employer branding is one, and you also have the usual, like the number of candidates who are actually coming on board after you make an offer, but going beyond that, with the multitude of data that you're actually tracking, how's that changing now?
So I think the advent of analytics or data into HR and TA today is kind of becoming really important, and it's one of the key pillars in terms of recruitment HR processes today. Before I even talk about how analytics is impacting a talent acquisition or an HR function, today analytics is playing roles right from the budgeting part. Right, today workforce management is a very key integral part of any organization today. A lot of organizations, including ours and some of the organizations that I know, are investing really big in terms of building a very strong workforce management processes which are based on analytics and data. So today, having a strong workforce management practice which kind of helps you in terms of budget your entire year's hiring forecast is a great way to start. And some of the key challenges that we as TA and recruiter folks or HR folks have seen over the years is basically we're a little averse to managing data because typically HR and TA has been a function which was driven more by intuition, right? So it's basically a mindset change where a lot of us are slowly adopting from being a very traditional intuition-based approach to recruitment. We are becoming more fact-driven and evidence-based in terms of our approaches towards hiring, and analytics can play a lot of roles. Just to give you some important areas, say for example, predictive analytics is a great area where we can really see how our hiring processes work. Then how can we leverage analytics to reduce our time to fill, or how can we improve our offer conversion ratios? These are some key matrices that I see from a TA perspective. But analytics kind of goes beyond talent acquisition too, because a lot of organizations that I know also use analytics to also predict attrition, a plan for the succession. So, today, if you look at data and analytics, it's a huge potential area for HR and TA in particular. We have a lot of potential for it. And what we have done so far is just tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of things that we can kind of reinvent in terms of our processes using analytics and data. I think this is a very interesting journey that a lot of us as TA and HR folks will go through over the next 5 to 10 years.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Dilip, what's your take? I mean, what have you been seeing in terms of analytics, either at your organization or the peers that you've been listening to across the region?
Sure. Considering I play a staffing hat, which is internal mobility, internal redeployment, and talent acquisition, for me, the first point is what Suresh said, which is having a very robust recruiting-led bottom-up workforce plan and a hiring projection. And that is, it has to be skip quarter for you to be able to strengthen your talent supply chain, because, like I said earlier, just-in-time hiring is no longer going to be possible. Because if you don't have the talent in the market, and but you have the market intel through the data and the database that you have, then you need sufficient time to be able to build talent internally, be it upskill or cross skill, the length and breadth of the technology. So for me, I follow a very simple 5-point rule when it comes to data and staffing and data and talent acquisition. The first one for me is the health index with respect to my database and pipeline. Am I having an ATS where I'm able to track an applicant footprint from the time we've made the first contact until they are a successful pursuit, or even if they are reject, am I able to go back and tap into that source whenever there is a need? How strong is my database? How strong is my funnel? Because that becomes my early warning indicator if I need to make a change into my existing process or policy or guideline, be it making a simple change to my employee referral process, right? So this data becomes extremely important for me. The second thumb rule there for me with respect to data is how efficiently are we analyzing a channel mix with whatever we have. When I say channel mix, how's my sourcing avenue like? Am I able to eliminate inefficiencies in the process? Now, this will help improve recruiter productivity. While it might sound basic and cliched and very simple, and everybody has to do it, what is so new about it? But the way you could innovate recruiter productivity is by having a leaderboard, creating a very healthy competition. Where it also helps me, Yogesh, is to have the chat with that recruiter. We're talking about recruiter well-being, very important, because this is a team that is really taxed. We're talking about a recruiter with very high demand from business, and a recruiter productivity is not just for measuring how many offers a recruiter has made, but it is also to go back to that person to understand, why have we not been able to do it? Is there a real challenge? How can we address that? How do we use data to go back to business to say why certain skills are not possible and that there is an unrealistic expectation? How do we sort of bridge that gap? All these three that I said will eventually lead you to a lower cost per hire and a higher fill rate, which is exactly what business would want. And these process improvements should lead you there. But the fifth point for me, which is very important and again stems from data, is the compliance angle to recruitment. I'm sure Suresh would agree with me when I say the function that collects maximum data today, even before a candidate becomes an employee, is recruitment. And the data privacy laws across the region, it is a very costly mistake if it happens once. So complying to privacy laws for the data that you collate, how efficiently you retain this data, what is your retention process like, when do you delete this data, is also equally important. As much as you analyze and work on the data to arrive at meaningful insights, adding the compliance angle to it, be it strengthening your employee contracts, your audits, for all of that, having a strong database is extremely important. And that's how I would look at data in addition to whatever Suresh mentioned. And I believe this will also be the input for strengthening my talent supply chain. In case I'm not able to fulfill, then I have the right market intel to see what I should be doing for my future.
Great, great. So one common thread that I heard in what both of you said is that as talent acquisition leaders, you're also looking to really be able to give back to the business by being very, very closely interlinked. And here's something I'm talking about more as a hiring manager than a recruiter here. And every successful hire that me or my team has made across organizations that I've worked with the past 20 odd years has always been where the TA team has been a very, very significant part of that success in making sure that we get the right folks on board with the right skills, with the right kind of right set of expectations, right? So obviously that stakeholder management, both to the hiring manager as well as the business, is something that's key and that's critical. But I've also seen a shift in the way that teams are also thinking, going beyond saying, all right, so here's the job description. Now I'm going to go and post it on a job board, or I'm going to go and look into my database and send you 500 CVs. Those days are long gone. At least for a hiring manager, they're long gone. What's your advice to teams, the teams that you work with, especially in terms of getting to know the business and getting to know what type of roles, what type of skills are needed at any particular time, or even let's say even a quarter down the line? Suresh, I'll start off with you over here. Any thoughts around this, especially as for a global business like yours, for a SaaS first business? I'm curious to see how things are, because it's slightly different in a high growth industry, slightly different in a traditional IT company versus other industries. Suresh, if you could go first. Suresh, you're on mute.
Yeah, so this is actually a very interesting question. Okay, when you ask the question of how should a recruiter or talent acquisition professional today engage with a hiring manager, I think the entire relationship model has kind of gone through a huge upheaval in the last 10, 15 years. What used to work in the past doesn't work anymore. What actually works today is, the collaboration between the talent acquisition professional and the hiring manager. I'll give you a simple example. Today, we as talent acquisition professionals have a strong understanding of the market, the dynamics that drive the market forces that determine the talent availability, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes that's a visibility that a hiring manager or business organization does not have. So a lot of times we assume that as a hiring manager, if I'm opening up a requisition, by default, the hiring manager possesses the knowledge that is needed to scan and understand the availability of the talent in the market. So that we start with that presumption. Sometimes that's the presumption that leads to a lot of challenges, because we know there may be some market roadblocks or market challenges that we have to kind of address innovatively. But we expect the hiring managers to know it by default. Sometimes they don't, and that's where the miscommunication or the relationship breaks down. So what really works, I'm talking not just as a TA leader today, but in my capacity, I have grown over the years from a recruiter to what I am today. Taking the hiring manager through the entire hiring process and kind of making them a partner, a key stakeholder in the process really helps, because our connection or our relationship with the candidate could be for a period of 1 to 4 months, depending on the notice period. Post that, the entire relationship is built by the hiring manager, who then becomes a reporting manager, right? So what really worked is, by taking the hiring manager through the process, bringing them as part of the calibration, working with them very closely, taking them through the market data, providing them insights, setting up post offer, setting up regular connects with the hiring manager, where the hiring manager has those conversations with the candidate to somebody who's offered, who's kind of going to join the organization. Building those bridges to make the job of a hiring manager easy when the candidate joins, I think that's the primary role of a recruiter. While we can, what happens a lot of times is we as recruiters get very hyper focused on the recruitment metrics, right? And when we kind of lose sight of the larger picture, which is basically our job is not just to find the right talent, but find the right talent and help the hiring organization connect with the talent. So when the talent gets onboarded, the talent then becomes successful. So that's something that we have to always keep in mind. I always have a example that I normally share with the folks I know. If you know rally car racing, in rally car racing, you have a driver and then you have a navigator. So a lot of times we as recruiters only focus on the driving part, which is basically driving the matrices of recruitment, getting profiles, putting them through interviews, getting the offer release, getting them onboarded. But there is another critical part of the role of the navigator. The navigator role here comes in terms of understanding what are the roadblocks that are there, what is going to be the next, the layout for the drive. So similarly, a recruiter not just has to play the role of a driver, but also need to be a navigator, working very closely with the businesses to provide them the insights which will actually make the entire hiring successful. Because a lot of times, being very hyper focused on KPIs, we may end up having the hire, but we may not have the great candidate which the hiring manager will have an experience to work with. So I think we have to kind of really balance out between focusing on the KPIs and the matrices, at the same time building relationships between the candidate and the hiring manager, which makes it the value add and beneficial for the organization.
Excellent. Dhilip, just taking off that and putting a question to you, right? Given that you're also looking at a lot of staffing, you're also looking at a lot of internal movements as well. How does this play into the mix, right? So given the width and the size of the business that you and your team are managing, I would imagine it's slightly different. The challenges that your team have is slightly different to what Suresh might have. What's your take, especially when looking at it from an international perspective?
Thanks, and excellent points there, Suresh. I completely agree with what you said. See, in the talent business, it's never enough, right? Whatever, how much ever you staff, you will still need to do more. But as a recruiter, I believe the say-do ratio is a shared responsibility between the hiring manager and the recruiter. Hence, we try and believe in this concept called co-sourcing whenever I have a complicated job description. And as a HR professional, I'm trying to understand the job description. I'm trying to go through the various keywords and technologies in it to source on the job portals wherever possible. But if I'm not able to, that's when I take help of the business and the hiring manager to do a co-sourcing session so that the reality is explained and the right expectations are set. Now, this is extremely important. And the biggest learning for me in this process is collaboration, because we're talking about having a job description, wanting to source for it. And if that particular skill is not available or it's not available a plenty in the market, we're looking at that as an input for the other HR arms to come together to be able to sort of develop a fluidity plan so that internal mobility can happen, or look at upskilling with all the other talent development practices that one may have. So for me, diversifying between various avenues that you have for hiring, be it your lateral or campus hiring, working along with the hiring managers to be able to arrive at this plan, be very clear and transparent in what is it that could be achieved, periodic business connects, and having candidate engagement, and also measuring candidate experience to feedback to the business to say that this is a candidate that we had hired and this is the engagement score, and there is something for us to do better, or this engagement score is exceptional, you've been something really wonderful, and we would want you to share and talk about these best practices and testimonies to other hiring managers, because this is a behavior that could be contagious if it's spoken more about. And hence, having that feedback shared from based on the candidate experience and onboarding experience, as well as the feedback going back to the manager and talking about it to more hiring managers, will actually help the process, in addition to whatever Suresh mentioned. So I believe the SERO ratio has to be a shared responsibility, and it has to be measured in ways possible with respect to not just onboarding, but also the continuity of that person and the productivity in the organization. And then you have a success story to talk about that could be role modeled in multiple businesses that we run. Sometimes it's about the skill, because there is always a familiarity. You're hiring similar skills for different business units, then you know what exactly worked and what could be replicated. I think that could also go a long way in improving the recruitment efficiency.
Right. So tying all this together, this actually reminds me of a conversation that I had with a guest on a previous webinar, where she was essentially saying that uh, one of the KPIs that a recruiting team should be assessed on is the propensity of a candidate or a set of candidates from a particular cohort to stay back after 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. Now, both of your organizations are large enough where you can actually track that, right? So is that something that you have considered doing? Is it something that you have checked? Because I think the long-term success of candidates joining an organization talks about the health of the employer brand as a whole. It talks about how successful the business leader is in terms of stakeholder management. It builds in a lot of what we have spoken about today. I'm just interested in hearing your take on that. I know it's not on the list of questions that we had planned on, but this is something that just came up. And Suresh,
this is something
you're smiling. I know you have a point of view on this one.
Yeah. So is that for Suresh? Okay.
Suresh and Dhilip, both of you.
Yeah, okay.
Suresh can go first.
Yeah, I think you touched upon the very critical part, which is the proof of the pudding, right? We can end up hiring the candidate, but the success of the candidate depends on how long the candidate stays as an employee in the organization. That's, of course, a very critical metric that we look at. It tells us the strength of the entire hiring process, because if you look at, there are multiple stakeholders that are part of the hiring process, right? While TA is a critical piece of it, equally we have the hiring of the business units plus the HRs who play the role. So when we look at these data points and when we see there is a high level of attrition that happens at the early joiner stage, somebody who leaves the organization in a very short period, say 6 months or 1 year, less than 1 year, that tells us that our hiring processes are not very robust. I think that's a look in the mirror moment for a lot of us to go back and see, are we kind of looking at the right set of the talent at the first place? And even if you're looking at the right side of the talent, are we kind of providing them the right opportunity to, get onboarded as an employee and then grow within the organization? I think that's a very critical, important stats that not a large organization, but any organization that should look. If we have a very high level of attrition happening at people who have joined in the recent past, I think that's a problem area that needs to be fixed immediately.
Excellent. Dilip, how about you? How do you see things?
I have a slightly different view there, Suresh. And if a candidate is leaving us, let's say in 6 months to 12 months, I think there's an equal responsibility from businesses end as well. I wouldn't say it's purely a recruitment failure, maybe. But what I would look at doing is what candidates are looking for today, is along with the benefits and an enriching career, is also the purpose that the organization has. And I personally believe employer branding cannot be force fit. It's directly proportional to what you are, what your culture and values are, and how your organization is revolving around the purpose. And that purpose becomes your brand, and that attracts candidate, and that becomes a sole conversation for me whenever I have a candidate to talk to. And to ensure that some of the leadership hires which is part of my KRA in the region as well, and that is a very costly mistake if it does not work for me. So what we have started doing is to give them a view of what is it in the life of a TCS in this role. Would you want to talk to somebody who's playing a similar role in a different market, to understand what this entails, so that you get that peer view, the peer support, before you really take that big call? You're at your prime time of your career, and you're really making a tough career choice to move to another organization. Can I make this process a little more seamless by giving them a view? It may not be possible for all views. Your bread and butter roles definitely not possible, where you hire in volumes, but skills and roles where you think it's an expensive mistake if it goes wrong, like what Suresh was saying. It is essential that we give them a view of what the role really entails through peer supports and peer interview supports, and give them that confidence that this transition is going to be seamless. It's as difficult as shifting houses, I would always say that. And hence you have the right mobility services, so that they're able to seamlessly move from one place to another and continue to grow around the purpose. So for me, just summarizing, employer branding cannot be force fit, but it is an outcome of what you do in your day-to-day work, as well as what is it that you do for the community at large. And for some of your key critical roles, it is worthwhile experimenting peer support before you really onboard someone.
Excellent, excellent. Some great takes there. Just want to shift slightly bit. While we have been talking a lot about external recruiting, hiring from external sources, I'm curious to, Dilip, this is to start off with you. Think about internal mobility and internal movements, right? So I know it's a lot of what you and the team have been working with. I'm curious to see if you have any war stories that you have to narrate, right? Because I think we have spoken a lot about some of our experiences, but I'd love to hear some of the war stories, things that went wrong, things that went really well, or the stuff that went really wrong. What's your take on internal mobility and where should
I think this is probably
the
the time where I will brag a bit, Yogesh, because the organization I come from, we have 5 different continents, 600,000 employees, and 150 different nationalities. So mobility is sort of homegrown. It's a way of life, right? You hire X percentage of talent from the market, but what you have in-house and mobility and giving them that career becomes the most important aspect for us. So our strong talent development practices continuously train associates for the future. So at least in my tenure, if I have to give you an example, I've seen 3 different waves of business revolution here. We spoke about agile, and then we moved to the cloud bandwagon. Now we're talking about AI. So there is this conscious push to always train, elevate, redeploy, backfill them, and then you still have to also manage a healthy pyramid. For all of this to be successful, the process that you have around your mobility policies is extremely important. What I intentionally try and do within the business units that we manage, as well as the region, is that you have an employee who has an aspired role and is slowly trying to progress towards the aspired role. The expectation of us is to provide them a clearly called out learning path. And once the learning gaps are closed, that's when you understand that someone's actually ready for a mobility. And that is the trigger for you, provided this person has spent a reasonable amount of time in the current role. Now, why is this a trigger? When I say trigger, it's also a trigger for the staffing team, because it becomes a trigger for you to start looking for a movement within the unit or a movement through hiring, and that becomes a very qualitative input for you to look at the next. So as a mobility practitioner, what I consciously look for is, do you have an aspired role for all your workforce? Are they really learning and progressing towards the aspired role? Are the gaps met? If the gaps are met, is when you really have to look at redeployment, because anyone who feels monotonic in their current job could be a flight risk. And by doing this mobility, you're actually avoiding a potential attrition there, and you're increasing your retention rate. So this is like a cycle, a nice cycle. I wouldn't say a vicious cycle, but if only you got the early warning indicators, I think it's an excellent cycle to crack.
Excellent. Excellent. Suresh, you have a take on internal mobility and how it applies at the businesses that you have worked with?
I think whatever Dhilip said actually resonates really well in terms of internal mobility. I think when we talk about early warning, I think this entire great resignation period was a good look in the mirror moment for a lot of organizations, because what was taken as granted in terms of internal mobility, the entire market shift and dynamics kind of threw everything out in the open for people. See, today, internal mobility for me is a very critical piece of business, because, what goes in terms of building knowledge, IP of an organization can be lost in a minute if an organization employee leaves and joins another organization, right? So a lot of organizations which went through the pain of losing great talent during the great resignation period realize that, while it's important to lose a certain percentage of your organization to attrition, which is to keep the organization healthy, it is important to retain a big part of a talent that actually had gone through the entire great resignation period, right? So if I have to look at some of the key investments that a lot of organizations doing today, they are in terms of building upskilling, as Dhilip said, building those skilling programs which kind of helps people to learn or pick up things that they aspire to do in life, and also planning for a succession in your organization, right? Earlier it was easier, or it was actually seen more, where organizations used to go to the market and pick from market for senior talent because they were looking for a plug and play talent. Today, a lot of organizations, what they're doing is they realize there may be somebody in the organization who may be only playing a 75-80% of the role. For them, it is better to get that person, move up the value chain, learn on the job, and then perform, than to look at somebody from outside. So a lot of organizations today, either written or unwritten, most of their senior levels or senior hirings happens through career progressions. Then most of the hirings that happens at the lower lateral levels, and a lot of organizations which have realized that retaining talent is important, they have really rejigged their plans to look at only internal mobility or internal vertical movements or lateral movements for their career progressions for senior talents. And in fact, that has really helped, because the organizations which have, in fact, I was going through one of the case studies of one of the consulting company, which is kind of published a white paper on this. The organizations which have implemented, good retention practices through internal mobility, they have increased the retention by almost 30% in the last 3 to 4 quarters. I think that itself is a good enough number for organization to really invest more and build strong policies and practices around internal mobility.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this. I just want to do a quick check on time, just make sure we have enough time left for some Q&A, because we have a few questions that have already come in. While we just get that started, Suresh and Dhilip, I just wanted to thank you immensely for today, and and thank you for all of the nice interaction that we had, and also the back and forth.
Thank you.
So there are a few questions that have come. So I think the first one we sort of touched upon earlier on, where we were talking about how AI will work only CVs are written well enough. And one comment that I made was that any vendor or anyone who's creating a system to look at CVs needs to be able to take into consideration that we remove as much bias from the system as possible. And because that bias can come from any place, either in terms of the language that you speak, the proficiency with which you're able to communicate, or gender diversity is another one which can very easily get missed out. So I believe as a vendor, I do believe that the ability of any platform to be able to cater to diverse elements and still understand a CV, even though it might not be well written, while still being able to give the right set of information to recruiters is number one. Another question that we have is, do you recommend any AI tools for recruiting and resume screening? Right. So that's one question that's come up. It's at Dhilip, both of you, if you have recommendations, you might have products that you might have built in-house that you might have, but then if there's anything that you have heard of, please feel free to let the audience know.
Sure. We'll take the first question, maybe on the resumes and well-written resumes, and we all know there are bots now available to even write resumes. So, which is why I repeatedly keep saying that if we don't coach our existing AI tools to be ethical, to be right and judicious, we may not really get the right results out of it. Hence, it's extremely essential what kind of products we use, how are we training the AI, are we having the right set of questions fed into it, and at the same time these are all enablers, and we still have a human, a recruiter who's human at heart as well, reviewing all of these profiles before it really reaches the business team. So we're really not replacing a recruiter with AI, but this is all enablers that we would probably think of. And how could we eliminate some of these biases? One, I said coaching the right bots. Unfortunately, I won't be able to name some tools on this platform, but what we could do is maybe connect one-on-one. I've seen Kusha, I've asked for that question. Maybe I'll find you on LinkedIn and we can probably have a chat around it. What we could do to make this process very effective is to ensure that you have a very clear articulation of how your recruitment process is, and it is not just determined on a CV review and just one discussion. We are moving towards providing interview support. We're talking about a simulation. We're talking about proof of concepts on cloud to clear evaluation. We're talking about psychometric tests. As a recruiter, you know what works well for the role you're looking at. Like what Suresh was saying, if you're hiring volumes and you're looking at developers, you need a coding contest, you need a test that's online that really tests a candidate's ability, not just CV, then opt for it. But if you're looking at a leader, then you might want to really look at having some psychometric assessments done. And I'm not saying that's the only one, but these are all various levers that complements your resume search. That's my take on that.
Yeah, I kind of completely resonate with that, Dilip, because there is no one glove fits all when it comes to AI tools, right? It again depends in terms of what is our org, what is that we're looking to hire, and what is our internal current capabilities. I think there are a lot of tools that are available in the market. It again depends in terms of what is the KPI that we are trying to get out of these tools. So I think it's very difficult to name one tool here because there could be plenty of tools which may work really good for somebody but might not work for me. So.
Excellent. So one flip side of that is we have Nasiman who's put a question saying that we have so many tools which work for job seekers as well, where the resumes tend to be really, really well written. But then when you actually speak to a candidate, that might not necessarily be the case. How do teams adjust for that, especially when generative AI is all around us now?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I think that's the Pandora's box for every recruiter, because the resume looks great, but when we get onto the interview platform, then it's the proof of the pudding is not there. One thing that I've realized that really helps, Yogesh, I think only tools can do to a certain extent, right? AI tool can screen profile, and there is a certain written algorithm which helps us in terms of refining the profile. And if it kind of finds a profile to be a good relevant fit, it's going to throw up a right match. I think this is where recruiters' capability becomes important, because a lot of recruiters today need to really work in terms of building their core capabilities. A recruiter, I would say, a 25% developer is what a recruiter should be, because he or she has to really understand what is the business needs, what is the primary drivers that a business will look for a successful hire for a particular talent that they're trying to hire. Again, a recruiter's job is not just to look at the keywords and try to match the keywords to the job description. It is to understand and really see if the candidate has the relevant capabilities that they have showcased in the resume that they can demonstrate. I think to a certain level of being hands-on in terms of understanding the skills needed for a person to be successful, I think that's the bare minimum that a recruiter needs. I think that really helps, because if a recruiter is able to screen a lot of these well-written resumes but lack of a real pedigree in terms of the role, I think that really makes the recruitment process easier, because the conversion rate becomes higher once they put profiles to the hiring managers, because they have already done a part of the hiring manager's job in vetting out the right set of profiles that needs to go through the interview process.
Great. Thank you. So next question I want to address over here is, where do you both see the tech hiring market moving in 2024 versus 2023? I'm sure you saw this coming, but it's something of interest to everyone.
I think it's definitely going to be booming as ever, with all the advent of AI and ML and predictive hiring that we spoke about through the entire conversation today. So it definitely is not going anywhere. But I would also think that organizations might want to get creative and also start to look at, working on a master data management of their own data, and to see if they could come up something that's homegrown, like what we do. For instance, we have a ATS that's built homegrown. Our analytics around it is homegrown. I would also think in my conversation with peers in the industry, some of them are also toying with the idea of trying to make sense of their data in a meaningful way to see how they could come up with some of these tools on their own, with the tech workforce that they have. So I think on the other hand, you will continue to have these advent of newer techs and newer products coming into the market. Like what Suresh was saying, what works for you, you will really need to personalize that. You will also see the advent of homegrown tools coming up because it's now possible, it's open source, and it is possible for you to create some of this. I have a very talented recruiter in my team who could write codes, like what you're saying, Suresh, 25% developer, automate some of what I need, and is also able to get things done at a faster pace and is able to customize using Power BI. Now, that's just an example as to how some of our recruiters would also start innovating. And going to that last question that Narasimhan had, I think I would also add in having a checklist to your application process. A resume is something that everybody could have, a creative resume. You can have the most flamboyant language in it. But what if you put in a set of questions that are very relevant to the role? And I do this with almost all job descriptions. 3 or 4 pointed questions that will help you articulate the work that you have done around the application that you're trying to put in. And this is something that probably an AI cannot crack it that easily unless you've trained it well. But you need to have some pointed questions to be able to navigate this issue with fake resumes and not seeing the right candidate when you really meet them after looking at a very beautiful JD and a resume.
Excellent. Maybe we'll just take a couple of quick questions since we are almost on the hour over here. So two link questions around startups, right? So how do you look at candidates, especially when they've had quick jumps, with so many layoffs happening and so many changes taking place? How do you look? How do you consider a candidate? What do you do to make sure that a candidate who's applying might be a good fit or might not be a good fit?
See, that's actually a very interesting question in today's context, Yogesh, because today a lot of things happening in the industry which is not in the direct control of the employee, right? So I think, as a recruiter, I think we should be more empathetic when we're looking at candidates. They may be somebody who may have multiple jumps, but it's very important to understand the reason or the rationale behind those jumps. If somebody who has been very passionate to work in startups and has steadfastly built exciting products for different startups, the probability of them getting laid off is higher because they have been working in an ecosystem which is less stable and more funding driven, right? So as a recruiter, that's where I think we have to apply our rationale, not go by a certain guideline or a set rule saying a person has to complete X number of years in a company before he or she has to be considered. There's a lot of variables that comes in. I think that's where the recruiter's job becomes very important, and that's where the entire the initial conversation the recruiter has with the candidate becomes even more paramount, because this is where the recruiter should be having conversations, understanding the entire life cycle of the candidate's journey through the tenure that they had, not just focused on the talent or the roles that they have played. I think as a recruiter, we have to be a lot more empathetic in the current scenario, and being rigid about looking at job stability without having the right rationale behind it. I think we may end up losing a lot of good talent in the market today.
Exactly. I would completely agree with that. Stability is as important when you look at a candidate, but at the same time, understanding what has caused that drift and that shift between a job to another is extremely essential to understand. We shouldn't look at a one-size-fits-all approach and say, if jump jobs and your stability is going to be a cause of concern for me.
Excellent. Thanks, folks. We are almost on the hour, but I just wanted to put a quick poll question to the participants today, asking a very, very simple question. What are the most challenging parts of recruitment for you? So there are three or four options down there. Please do mark your choices. But in the meanwhile, I just wanted to say thank you to our panelists. and we will have more of our webinars coming in soon. In fact, we have one happening just next week where we are talking about riding the AI wave. We have Pavani from Tech Mahindra and Roli from BabbleBots who are our guests, and Nataraju from our team is going to be the host. That's happening next Wednesday. So we will be sending you a link to sign up, where we hope to learn more about all of these. But in the meanwhile, I wanted to say thank you to both Dhilip and to Suresh. This has been an excellent session. The kicking off this webinar series has been absolutely brilliant for me. I definitely learned a lot today, and I wanted to thank you all for taking the time out today, and asking all the great questions. While unfortunately we didn't have time to answer all of these, we will try to answer them offline as well. We will be putting up this the video on LinkedIn as well, so we can take the conversation over there. Remember to follow our LinkedIn page for more such webinars that are there. And once again, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time, and I wish you a wonderful start to 2024.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Yogesh.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful 2024.